that involves supernatural romances between some kind of supernatural creature and a human lover. So there's were-tigers that fall in love with humans, or these fungpuinu. I don't know if please pardon my pronunciation of all Indian languages.
I don't think there are too many people from Mizoram here, so I think you'll be okay.
I'll butcher the Hindi and the Tamil also, so please, just a blanket apology for my pronunciation. But so there are these kind of ogre witches with big eyes that have, they're famous for having really large lice that bloat up to the size of brinjals, and they force their captives to pick them from their hair. It's quite grisly. Anyway, so that's a fun book. Some of the romances are sort of sweet, and some of them are not so sweet. But in the process of doing this, I was reading about Tamil ghosts, and I was reading about Mizo ghosts, and I was thinking, but most people who are reading in English in India, they are only really aware of werewolves and vampires and the same stuff that we get in Western horror movies. We have such an amazing variety of stories about these scary creatures. And I thought, let's put them in a book. So I just started collecting them, and the book came to be.
And how many ghosts, monsters, and demons are there in the book?
I forget now. There's, I think, 300 and some main entries.
300
and then
entries.
There's subtypes, so I think it gets to be 700 and all if you count the subtypes.
But how difficult was it to find it? Because you said you started out because you did this book and you noticed all these Tamil ones, and then you found these Mizo ones. But then when you look at the whole country and you want to represent the whole country, were some regions much more challenging than others? Because, I grew up in Bengal and we knew a bunch of Bengal ghosts. I had no idea Kashmir had so many kinds of ghosts.
Some of it is due to other great folklorists who have been writing wonderful books. There's Onaiza Drabu, who recently came out with a book called The Legend of Himal and Nagraj, which is a book of Kashmiri folktales. And a lot of them are Naga stories. There's a lot of really interesting folklore from Kashmir involving Nagas. And also the Rantas, who's like a witch who lives in the mountains, who's got really long hair that covers her face half the time. And she has a predilection for strapping young men, especially those who suffer from premature baldness. She really likes that, and likes to abduct such men and take them to her cave on the mountains and use them as her sex slaves. So.
There's actually a surprising amount of ghost human sex and love, sex, whatever, in the book. Did that surprise you?
Not really. Like you think about, even now, like you have Twilight, as one of the best-selling books of all time. People have liked this stuff always, I think. But yeah, some of it, and some of them are abductors, like the Rantas. But there's also a fair amount of consensual human supernatural love. So yeah, those are nice stories too.
Since we are here in Odisha, it obviously leads to the second question. How rich is Odisha in terms of ghosts, monsters, and demons?
Yeah, so there are several stories from Odisha in the book. I have not really spent much time here. This is my second trip to Bhubaneswar, and the first one was only for a day or two. But so one of the stories is from the Gond pantheon, and you can't really say these are ghosts or demons, but the Gond spirit was called Penu, I think, and there was a goddess, really. The Gonds would have considered her a goddess called Tari Penu, who was, according to the old British accounts, the object of human sacrifice. So they used to take. It had to be someone who was purchased. They would not take a captive themselves and sacrifice this person to Tari Penu. It had to be someone who was bought, who had been enslaved or captured by somebody else. And often this person was called the Meria sacrifice. I don't know, many people here might know. I don't know how well known this history is here. But while this practice was current, the Meria would actually be allowed to live in the village and treated quite well. They were not supposed to cut their hair, but they would be fed and they didn't have to do any work, and they lived quite a privileged life until the day when they were gotten very drunk and taken around in a procession around the village and finally chopped down in front of the idol. And their organs buried in the sand, buried in the ground. And this is supposedly, without this, the crops would not turn out right. The mustard would not take on the right color. So
well, it is the fatted calf, sort of. Right? Yeah. We treated well with the... But, you know, we actually this morning, both of us happened to simultaneously go to the temple that most of you are aware of, the 8th century temple to the Chamunda Devi, which is near the Lingaraj temple. We couldn't get in because the temple only opens early in the morning, and it's open right now as we speak. When we went there, it was closed. But and you mentioned that in the book. Right.
Yeah, so I mean, what was amazing to me is I found out while I was researching the story of the Vedal. So, I mean, the most familiar Vedal is Vikram and the Vedal, which was on Doordarshan, and everybody knows about Vikram and the Vedal. But there are Vedals that turn up in lots of different pockets of India. So, like, Goa has a god called Vedal, and he's always depicted with fangs and naked, and he lives in the forest, and there are various legends about him. People offer him leather chappals. There are Vedals who show up in Tibetan mythology, and there are Vedals who show up there's a Vedal temple in Kumaon, I think. So it's an interesting myth. It comes up in different places. And it's like usually the Vedal is actually a disembodied spirit who can occupy a corpse if they so choose. And it comes in Buddhist myths also, and there's actually a Buddhist goddess called Vajravedali, who's the consort of Vajra Bhairava. And she's this very scary character who's always got a chalice full of blood, and she rides on a donkey on a saddle made of human bones and covered with human skin, and the donkey has a wound on its hindquarters, which is also an eye, so she can see her enemies if they approach from behind. She's a very threatening character. But she's also associated with Chamunda. And apparently when this temple, I guess it's the Bhaumkara, I'm not sure if I'm saying that, Bhaumkara dynasty, was kind of equally Buddhist and Hindu for quite some time. And so that temple, although it's called the Chamunda temple, it's also sort of to Vajra Vedali, which I suppose is why the name Vedali temple has come. So yeah, the Veda legends are very interesting.
But that also leads to this other interesting question for you as the person putting this book together. When we look at these things which are part of tantric traditions and tantric rituals, how do you make that distinction between what is a goddess and no matter how fearsome and ferocious and terrible she might seem, you know, what is it, like one person's goddess can easily be another person's demon or monster.
Right. So that was a difficult question for sure, because there are many demons and ghosts which are objects of worship. So do you call that a god or do you call it a demon? I made some criteria by which I tried to draw a line. I'm not sure if it worked exactly perfectly. I hope nobody gets offended that I've called their deity a ghost. But yeah, I think there are many ghosts who are objects of veneration, which is very interesting.
So what were the criteria? What was that line you drew?
I'll have to look it up. Yeah, I forgot now. I can try.
Sure. Look it up.
Let's see. Let's see. Oh no.
While Rakesh is looking it up, I'll actually read out a line I wrote down from one of my favorite ghosts and monsters from Odisha. And this is from the Gadaba tribe. And it's a monster called Rao. And I love it because the description of Rao says, Rao is often compared to the police because they both turn up suddenly, bring in principle nothing good, and have to be negotiated with and given what they ask for so that they will leave their victims in peace, which I thought was a really marvelous description all around.
I think that's from the Parangi Poja. No? That's also, I think, Andhra and Orissa border they're from. Yeah, so this is what I had read. So I actually have a degree in mathematics, so I sometimes look at these things in terms of set theory. So I said we had attempted to include the union of the following sets. All those supernatural or mythical entities who are primarily malevolent towards humankind, all those who are ghosts of dead people, and all those who are clearly not objects of worship. So by taking the union, if you lie in any one of those sets, then you're in the book. I tried. I missed many things, I think.
One of the other interesting things, and I think this is also very relevant to Odisha, because a lot of the ghost monsters that are there come from many different tribal traditions,
Yes.
tribal tradition. Can you talk a little bit about that and the fact that in many cases these are monsters who were then sort of, or they may have been a god in a tribal tradition and then they were subsumed into Hinduism when it came there into becoming a monstrous spirit?
Yeah, well, I mean, even in Hinduism, actually, like, there's not really a clear distinction when you say the word like Deva or Devati. Like, that word is very old, and it comes, through Persia, and it has lots of different meanings in different languages. And there's something like a ghost in the Persian tradition called a Dev. So, this what is a spirit, what is a god, what is a demon? I think it's not only a gray area in tribal traditions; it's a gray area everywhere. But yeah, I mean, in the tribal folklore, I was really excited about, especially getting into the tribal folklore from the Northeast. So my into that was through Cherry Changte in Mizoram, but and also the Kasi author Kinfam Singh Nongkinre, who has a really brilliant book called Around the Hearth, Kasi Legends and Folktales, which I recommend to anybody. It's a wonderful book. And recently has brought out some gigantic tome, Funeral Nights.
Funeral Nights.
But yeah, so those Kasi demons and monsters are really amazing, really mind-blowing traditions.
Do you have any theory as to why the Northeast, which has so many small states, is so rich in terms of ghosts and monsters? Because it seems like every valley has its own versions of yetis and sort of different kinds of monsters.
Yeah, I mean, I have called it in my book a necrodiversity hotspot. So there are several of these necrodiversity hotspots. They seem to happen in the northeast of India, in the Western Ghats, and yeah, I mean, I think it's probably related to the same reason that there are so many languages, right? The geography makes it difficult to travel, so people end up a little bit isolated, and languages diverge much faster. But you find these very interesting commonalities in different folklores from the Northeast, which actually, in researching my books, I realized that many people from various states of the Northeast are not aware of themselves, that they have, there's this underworld guardian, who is there in Mizo folklore. He's called Pupala, but he has another name, Nawang, in Assam, like in different tribes in Assam. This character is there, and he has the same attributes. He'll kind of guard the path that the souls take on their way to the village of the dead, and he'll bother them on the way, and you have to try to distract him. So, which is why in all of these traditions they'll keep with the dead body some shiny seeds or some rings or something that they can throw, so that the demon will run and chase them, so that they can hustle onwards and get to the village of the dead. So those are commonalities that you find in Garo folklore, in Mizo folklore, in many of these traditions. So it's interesting because they're very different. They have different names. The particulars will be different, but there are commonalities.
And apart from the commonalities, did you also see a lot of any examples of how monsters traveled? Did they, when people went across on sea to Southeast Asia, did they carry their monsters and ghosts with them?
Yeah, there are some, Sandeep, that are really hard to understand how it happened. Like there's one, there's a ghost who's also, this is a ghost who is venerated as a god also from Kumaon, called Airi, A-I-R-I, Airi, I suppose, who is supposed to be the ghost of a very wealthy huntsman who died while on shikar, and is carried through the forest at night on a palanquin with several other ghosts in attendance. He's got his litter bearers are called Sao and Bao, and they walk through the forest going Sao Bao, Sao Bao, and he spits venom. If his venom hits you, you're really in trouble. You need some spiritual healing, or you'll die very, very quickly. And his eyes are on the top of his head, so he's always staring at the heavens. This same character is there in Malaysia, and I have no idea how he got there. He is called Hantu Pemburu. Hantu is Malaysian for any kind of ghost. Hantu Pemburu is the name of the spirit in Malaysia. And he's found in Kumaun, and he's found in Malaysia, and as far as I can tell, he's found nowhere in between. So I really, it's like, how did this story make it from there to there? Somebody traveled long back and told the story, and it was remembered. I'm not sure.
We were listening to Mr. Bond, and he's of course famous for his ghost stories, and you do talk about Mr. Bond's ghost stories in there. But one of the things that struck me while reading the book is that when we read ghost stories, they are always the ghost of a particular dead person. So if I was to, suddenly drop dead somewhere, I might be haunting the Bhuvaneshwar Club, for instance. This is my ghost haunting the Bhuvaneshwar Club. But many of the monsters you are talking about are types. So they're not particular people. They're not named Sandip or Rakesh or Ruskin. They are a kind of monster. Is that a critical difference also between ghosts as we grew up with reading them in Western literature versus ghosts that come out of these kinds of folklore traditions?
So I think, at least in the Anglo-American tradition, I don't know so much about the rest of Europe, but in the Anglo-American tradition, ghosts tend to have many of the attributes of the people they were in life. Like if you read, a Christmas Story, Charles Dickens, Marley is sort of, he acts like Marley was when he was alive, or he remembers things, and they have the same character. Like if the person was a sweet person, their ghost will also generally be like a helpful person. But I find that in the South Asian tradition, and actually Southeast Asian tradition too, no matter how sweet and wonderful a person was in life, after death they can become a real monster. And it's not, and it doesn't say anything bad about their character when they were alive. It's like, especially in the myth of the Chudel, like especially throughout the country, the ghost of a pregnant woman is the most fearsome. But it's not saying that she was a fearsome person when she was alive. It's just that because of that tragedy, she becomes really, really scary.
Which actually leads me to the question, what is the gender mix when it comes to the ghosts and monsters you found?
Yeah, I still have, you asked me that last time we spoke. I haven't done the data analysis, but I think it's roughly 50-50, I think.
It is roughly 50-50. Yeah. But is there different, like, are a lot of the female ghosts, or are more female ghosts and monsters avenging terrible things that had happened in their life as women versus the men?
Interesting one. I have to think about that. Well, I would say no. I mean, the myth of the Chudel is common and has different names, but goes throughout the country and even into Indonesia. It's a common myth. But I guess there's like if you can talk about the yetis, no? Like the female yeti is the female of the species is stronger and more terrifying than the male, but they're not considered wronged in any way. They're just big terrible she yetis. Let's see.
And by the way, if you read your Tintin and the Abominable Snowman and you thought there was one kind of yeti, you should read this book, because there are lots of different kinds of yetis and they come in all sizes.
I'm actually considering whether we should come out another encyclopedia of the different yetis.
Just for the
there's
yeti.
So many. There's in the Garo Hills. There's of Meghalaya. There's a yeti. In Tibet has 3-4 kinds. There's many different names. Even the same tradition will have 3 or 4 different sizes. The Nyalmo being the largest and most terrifying.
Yeah. And can you talk a little bit about, if you were to suddenly come upon one of these terrifying yetis on your way back home from the Bhuvaneshwar Club, are there good strategies in dealing with a monster like that?
So many of the folktales about yetis involve flute music or whistling. They seem to be attracted and entranced by whistling sounds. Although some of the like the Sikkim tales, like it's the Yeti who does the whistling, so you have to be there's some association in any case, and yeah, many of the tales have a person charming amorous but also murderous she Yeti by means of flute music and using the flute music to lull her to sleep and escape.
Okay, lull her to sleep, because I mean, it could have the opposite problem of if you got too entranced by the flute music and wanted to keep me permanently because I was such a sweet whistler.
Yeah, I think the Jamfi Mung, which is the Lepcha version of the Yeti, there's a story about her keeping her slave there, play flute for me every night, every night, every night. He starts to waste away.
And there's another one, if I remember right, where it's about you're supposed to look the monster in the eye, or no, you're supposed to look at their feet.
Ah, yes.
And then if you look at their feet, they trip.
Yes, if you look them in the eye, you're in trouble because they'll grow very, very, very tall. But if you look at their feet, they'll shrink and become like, a few inches tall, and then you can easily like put them in a box or something and get away. That's Tiso Jonding, I think. Tiso Jonding, which is the Karbi Anglong province in Assam. They have this myth.
We are in Odisha, and when we were talking about the female thing, one of the things which you also mentioned in the book is that actually there is in Keonjhar, I think, there is a memorial statue to the victims of witch hunts, which were very common. And, right now we're talking about many of the funny anecdotes when it comes to monsters and things, but there is a very serious thing that also in the name of monsters, witches, and demons was about witch hunts that happened here. Can you talk a little bit about that and why, what were the implications behind it?
Yeah, I mean, it was a thing I started worrying about as I got deeper into the book and writing it, that, okay, a lot of these superstitions are really rampant, and there's some really actually horribly tragic things that happen because people take these superstitions seriously. And of course, witch hunting is not unique to India. I mean, it's happened all over the world. Europe has its own very dark history of that. I think Saudi Arabia executed somebody for witchcraft just a few years ago. So but it's very much a living problem here also, and it shows up in weird places in history. I think during the Mundo Rebellion, like part of the reason they were really angry is because they thought the British were protecting their witches. So there's some strange things that go on. So and it goes back very far also. Like I found references in the Akbarnama, like the chronicle of Emperor Akbar's reign, where they talk about a witch being put on trial and thrown into the Yamuna in Delhi.
Is that the oldest reference you found to a witch?
I think so. There might have been something in Ibn Battuta also. Yeah. But yeah, I mean, it goes back quite a long way, and it's still very much alive. So that's it's scary. And there's a lot of organizations that are working to stop that kind of. It's also just a very convenient way to take an old woman's property. I think some of the people are not so credulous actually in the myth of witchcraft. But if there's an old lady and the men in her life have passed away and she owns a lot of property and you want it, you label her as a witch and rouse up the community against her, and it's a convenient way to steal stuff. So,
yeah, I mean, it is a kind of. I mean, it is a. So in that sense, this book is also socio-political because it sort of shows how these attitudes that we've had have changed and evolved or not changed over time. But how have ghosts and monsters themselves changed over time in India? Because in some sense, when we think about ghosts and monsters, say in Europe, they seem kind of fixed. There were vampires were always vampires, and they're still vampires. Werewolves were always werewolves and were still werewolves. But in India, the fact that we had, and tomorrow we'll have Tony Joseph talking about these waves of people who have come, and how have these different waves of people who have come to India changed the ghosts, monsters? How have they enriched it?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. There's many layers. One of the interesting ones is the Munda language family, which newer research is saying that while we say Adivasis, they're also somewhat new to the subcontinent in the sense that their language is pretty closely related to Vietnamese. and that it shows that there were a lot of people who came from that part of Southeast Asia maybe as early as 4,000, 5,000 years ago. I don't know if Tony Joseph agrees with this or not. It's one theory. But bringing with them a whole different set of mythology and ghosts and supernatural beings who have very little to do with either the Dravidian or the or the North Indian traditions, and some of those, like especially with the Sora tribe, I think they're also somewhat in Orissa and Andhra Pradesh. Some of those traditions are very interesting. They're really different.
And one of the really fascinating things is when you think about these ghosts, you have it's about Andamanis, and I wrote this down because it says the Andamanis use these words called Lau and Chauga to describe mainland Indians, Europeans, and other outsiders. So to them, most of us who would be here are sort of somewhat monstrous. And the only ones who they are regarded as considered fully human in experience are black Africans.
Yeah, so the folklore from the Andamans is not very current. I mean, those tribes have been so changed and scattered by the colonization of the island. Some of the languages have died out and all. But so I was drawing on anthropological work that was done in the 1960s, a lot of it. But yeah, there's some really interesting traditions where after death, there's a sort of fetus-like entity inside the corpse which crawls through the ground and out the bottom of the ground into some sort of subterranean global ocean and swims to a foreign land where it turns into us.
So we are the post-death Andamani tribes.
Yeah, I mean, according to one tradition, yeah. There's another nice one from the Andamans about the racket-tailed drongo who perches above the rainbow and shoots people with, you were asking about ghosts that are active in the daytime. So they blame sunstroke on these spirits that live above the rainbow and shoot you with their spears when you're standing too long in the same place in the hot sun.
Oh, wow. And since we talked about Andamans, it would be remiss not to talk about the islands on the other side. Do you remember the ghosts that you encountered from the Lakshadweep?
Yeah, so Lakshadweep, most of Lakshadweep has a lot of commonality between the ghosts of Kerala, but there are some monsters that are particular to the reef, especially in Divehi, which is the language of Minikoi and also of the Maldives. So there's Faru Fureta. So that name Fureta is actually Pret, but changed into their language. The P becomes an F. And Faru, I think, means reef. So it's Faru Fureta it's not a ghost, it's more of like a sea monster. So those things are huge and they reek of rotting fish and they have really big, like fish-like fangs, like they're translucent fangs. They'll crawl up off the reef in the middle of the night and eat you. And there's also one called the Beri, which takes the form of a giant log, which will just float around the Lakshadweep Sea for centuries until it washes up onto the beach of an island. And then if a good-looking young woman happens to sort of stand over it, astride it, giving it a view of something or other, it wakes up and in the night turns into a human form, goes to the village chief, presents itself as a visitor from another island. Oh, I just got off the boat early. Can you give me some work? And it'll marry that girl, but at night it'll sneak off to the cemetery and start eating corpses. Eventually, when it's discovered and it's eaten all the corpses, it'll start eating the humans. And there are some islands in the Maldives, actually, which have been completely evacuated because the Beri has eaten everybody there.
Eaten everybody there. Which leads to the question, all this sex that is happening, were ghosts and monsters like these stories also a kind of convenient way to sort of look, but don't ask, don't tell about maybe extramarital affairs and things like that as a way to deal with that reality?
Probably, yeah. There's, I think the one that comes to mind is the Baramba, who is a ghost in the Warli tribe. The Baramba was like invisible most of the time, but if he showed himself, he would be like fully white with a staff. I think his staff has some bells on it or something and jingles when he walks. Sometimes you can hear him even if you can't see him. But the Baramba would, find some lady that he liked and try to lie down with her. If she wasn't happy, she could just tie a piece of leather around her neck and she would go away. But some ladies were interested in
some
having
Baramba action.
some Baramba action, yeah. So and it was said that children with albinism were thought to be fathered by the Baramba.
So having done that, do you have any theories as to why ghosts, monsters, and all existed? Because some of it is, obviously there are creatures in there which are fantastic creatures that are travelers' tales. Travelers go to the court of some king and they say, oh, in India we found this magnificent worm or this giant dragon-like creature, which may or may not have existed, may be embellished. But beyond that, what purpose do you think they served? And this is obviously a hypothetical question.
Right. Yeah. It's a good one. And I think I've written something about it in my introduction.
Yeah, it leads because now we often think of monsters as a way for parents to tell their children, oh, you be a good boy or a good girl, otherwise this monster is going to come and eat you up at night. But I'm sure they served some other reason beyond making children go to bed in time.
Yeah, well, one thing is that in tribal traditions, and in all traditions, I think before people really understood the germ theory of medicine, the names of the evil spirits are just the names of diseases. They're actually the same. They thought it was possession by the spirit, but it was just their name for malaria or their name for there were certain symptoms that would happen to somebody when they got this kind of sickness. So they would name it, and they would name that as an evil spirit, and then some mythology would grow up around that character, and they would figure out how to draw it and say what kind of clothing it wore or something. So I think and that's why a lot of this folklore, actually, when I was researching it, I found in books of ethnomedicine, which is yeah.
What was the most difficult one to find?
Let's see. Actually, some parts of, surprisingly, I think some parts of the Hindi belt were difficult. I think because maybe the folklore of that area has become enshrined in Hindu mythology. So when we think of Nagas or we think of Kinnaras or Bhoots and Prets and Pisasas, which are known from Sanskrit texts and have become sort of pan-Indian and actually beyond India also. Those were the folkloric ghosts and spirits of that area. But there are also probably new ones.
Yeah, so they've been sort of mainstreamed, and
they've been mainstreamed, exactly.
Ghosts have become mainstream. Which leads me, I was also, did you find other examples where we've been able to sort of capitalize on our rich tradition of ghosts? Or there's probably a lot more that can be done, because you talk about in Bangalore, there's a chain of all-you-can-eat buffet restaurants which are named after the Bakasura, because Bakasur had a legendary appetite. So I think there is a lot of commercialization possibilities in these ghosts.
Well, I also threw in the Onida Devil, which
the Onida Devil,
anybody
of course, we remember.
in the 90s who watched TV here. Yeah, sure. And actually, in a lot of regional language television, you'll find the ghosts from that state being used as part of television serials, and there's very modern living traditions of even many of the tribal spirits. So that's kind of fun.
And when we lost our connection with Mr. Bond because of this technology. But how has technology affected ghosts, monsters, and demons? Has it birthed new ones, or has it resulted in the extinction of old ones?
Well, there's some interesting ones that have sort of become social media buzzes or have gone viral. Maybe a little bit before Twitter and all that. There was the Munochwa in Uttar Pradesh. Some people said it was an insect. Some people said it was a monster. Some people said it was a robot. Some people said it was a genetically engineered robot insect monster that Pakistan had made to infiltrate the country. But there were lots of news reports about this small little face clawer thing that would go around in villages near Lucknow and go in the night and scratch people's faces. And it was supposed to have lights on it that blinked and stuff. So, and then there's the Monkey Man in Delhi. I don't know if that's exactly a technological monster, but he was supposed to also have some lights. I think he had blinking lights that he either wore or that were part of his body and rode on rollerblades. And then there's
This is not a technological one, but in Odisha itself, there was the sheep killing.
the
monster.
sheep killer of Niali.
Niali.
Yeah, yeah. So that wasn't. I think in 2017 there were all these reports about sheep that would be found with all their blood sucked out, or the internal organs gone, but no other signs of damage. Like, they hadn't been cut, but they were suddenly drained of blood. And those news stories, were picked up by various channels, and then like really weird pictures were put on them. And there was also some video of these strange animals that didn't really look like wolves and didn't really look like jackals. I think, I don't know if Mr. Vikram Grewal is speaking in a couple days about the wildlife of India. I don't know if he has any comments on cryptozoology, but there are these strange animals that we're not sure if they're animals or they're shapeshifters or something. But if you look, that was actually one where I wished that it wasn't just a print book, but I had some kind of multimedia presentation, because it's really fun to look at the weird pictures and videos that are online about the sheep killer of Niali.
Well, it is a print book, but there are actually illustrations. Can you talk a little bit about, was that always important to you to have illustrations? And you work with a bunch of different artists. It's not one artist doing the illustration. So, how did that process work?
Yeah, I mean, so I started working with Apu Pen, who's a graphic novelist from Kerala, but he lives in Bangalore. We published his first graphic novel, Moonward, in 2009, but he's got several out since then. He's a wonderful artist. He also does a very hard-hitting satirical political comic called Rashtra Man, which I encourage everybody to look up. But he was interested in contributing to the book right off, and he kind of set the tone for it a little bit with the cover. There's a female ghost here by a tree, and he's done several more inside. But also I thought, it was, we thought it would be interesting to work with artists from different parts of the country and get some slightly different styles. Inspired a little bit in that way by a book that was close to my heart growing up, the Advanced Dungeons & Dragons Monster Manual, which had illustrations of all the different monsters by a variety of artists. So.
And you chose which ghosts and monsters that you wanted to be illustrated, or
I gave all of the artists like some options. So Samita Chatterjee is another artist who has a lot of, I think she's got more pictures in the book than anyone else. So I'd given her a list, and she chose which ones she wanted. And Pankaj Thapa from Sikkim contributed a couple of really nice pieces. And so there's a variety of artists that worked on it. I had a lot of other contributors, yeah.
I think we're at that witching hour when we have to take some questions from the audience. So there'll be a mic going around, and please put your hand up and we'll come to you. Don't be shy. There you go.
I have a question actually. What is your take on how these ghosts are portrayed in like movies, TV series? We're seeing a lot of that right now. So how do you think, like, what is their portrayal like?
I didn't get the last part of the question. Can you just repeat?
A lot of OTT content and movies are being made right now where ghosts are being portrayed. So what is your view on their portrayal?
Yeah, I mean, more power. I like horror shows. Yeah, I mean, some movie creators and some television creators are more true to the myths than others. Some will just take a name and run somewhere completely in a different direction with it, which I think is fine. Adds to the myth. There was, I think, one Hindi series called Bedal, which was, I don't know how much they really based it on the Bedal myth, but it was an interesting first couple episodes. I liked it.
Do you think, though, a lot of it, we still, I mean, I'm just saying this offhand, do we still look too much to Western ideas of ghosts and things in terms of this content as opposed to what's right here?
I think maybe in Indian English media we do. Actually, if you get into like Hindi serials or
Yeah.
Tamil serials or something, you see a lot of different stuff. But I think Anglophone Indians maybe like don't have enough access to this stuff.
My mother used to watch a Bengali serial where the wife was suddenly, there was a bomb explosion. She died, and we thought she was gone because it was a perfectly normal soap opera until then. And then 2 days later, she was back as a ghost. And the only way you knew that she was a ghost, because unlike everyone else, her sari did not change at all anymore. She basically remained in the sari she was in when she was blown up. So she didn't get to change while everybody else was putting on their jewelry and taking it off.
In Tamil serials, like the typical thing is just there's snakes. Any horror series in Tamil must have snakes. Lots of people changing into snakes. Snakes.
Other questions? Ghosts? Favorite ghosts? Ghosts you want to hear about? Do you have a question? Or is your hand just up? I was asking you. I thought you might tentatively have a question. Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, she's up.
हेलो मुझे एक सवाल पूछना था
Little
कि
closer.
मुझे एक सवाल पूछना था कि जैसे कि सारे मूवीज़ में या फिर हम लोग जब भी भूत के बारे में सोचते हैं तो सब लोग बोलते हैं कि वाइट कपड़े में आते हैं, बाल खुले हुए, तो ये सच है या फिर मतलब आप देखे हैं, कहीं पे सुने हैं, या फिर हमको भुत्तू बनाया जा रहा है कि वाइट कपड़े में भी आते हैं और बाल खुले हुए, बड़े बड़े मतलब आंखें पूरा ब्लैक आईज के साथ, तो उसके बारे में थोड़ा मुझे डिटेल में बताइए, सच है नहीं है, क्या है?
So, although my name is Rakesh Khanna, I grew up in California and my mother is American and my Hindi is really, really poor.
But
so I got white clothes and long
yeah, so
hair and
basically
big
she's
eyes
asking
and whether
the
it's true.
stereotype, it's the white clothes, the open hair, the big eyes. Is that a ghost cliche or is it true?
There are, I mean, yeah, that comes almost all over the country. The white. I think Chudales generally, the Chudale is generally wears white and has long hair, and I think in Kerala there's the Vada Yakshi who's also shown like that. Mohini Pisasu in Tamil Nadu also wears white, has long hair. I'm not sure. I think Calcutta must also have these. So it is common. But there are other ghosts that have different clothing also.
So that can't be your only criteria. Someone sitting right here in perfectly colored clothes could very well be an actual one of the ghosts and monsters. So you can't rely on the whiteness factor. Any last question? Yeah, there's one last question. They will just take that.
Hello. Good evening.
You can put the mic a little closer.
Good evening. My name is Vijay Patnaik. I have heard stories about ghosts from my childhood. But childhood ghosts still hunt. They are still there. Same name Hadavai, same name Basili, etc. there. And there are some other names in other provinces like Mr. Khanna told. They are there. I wish to know, because you are an avid researcher in ghosts, I wish to know your opinion or your views or any proof you have seen or heard, that are they upgrading themselves with the with the technology?
Are ghosts operating with our technology? Okay.
Upgrading themselves.
Upgrading themselves. Okay, I will tell you one very interesting thing that I uncovered in researching certain kind of jinn. So in jinn mythology, there is one type of jinn called ifrit. And it seems that many people believe that the ifrit of India are good at computer hacking. And actually that there's a whole, some group that I found on the internet discussing how the Conficker worm, which was a malware attack in, I think, I don't know, some 2000, yeah, some decade ago, was perpetrated by jinn. So I think yes. I mean, I think some of them are learning some technology. It does seem that way.
I mean, I think a lot of people will insist that their phones are possessed by evil spirits who are constantly doing mysterious things with them. With that, I think we've come to the end of this session. Thank you very much for joining us for this session on ghost monsters. Rakesh is going to be here, and I guess you will sign books if people want
Yeah.
a copy.
Yep. There's some in the back. I think
He
still.
will sign them. So, great. Thank you so much.
Thanks so much. Thanks, Sandip.
Thank you, Rakesh and Shondeep. There's a bookstore at the back, and all of our authors' books are available. You can get them and get